on eBay or
out to we're out to Chamber of Commerce to distribute to businesses that are opening up.
oh, that's good. That's needed.
Okay, we are officially live on YouTube.
Good evening. I'd like to call the June 10th, 2020 Henrietta Town Board to order. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Here?
Councilmember Stafford,
Here.
Councilmember Safranek,
Here.
Councilmember Bolsner,
Here.
Supervisor Schultz.
Here. As always, we'll begin with a silent prayer followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes from May 27th, 2020.
Second.
Any discussion? Other than had to do a lot of typing to get all that in there. Hearing no further comments, please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Aye.
Councilmember Stafford.
Aye.
Councilmember Safranek,
Aye.
Councilmember Bolsner,
Aye.
Supervisor Schultz.
Aye. So I just had Andrew put together, get the quotes for the tablets, just so you'd see what we don't actually have to vote on this because it's under the limit for the supervisor, but I just wanted to get one last sign off before we did. So basically it's the 5 tablets and then the keyboards on the second page. So 5 of those. Any questions?
Great, they're needed. So we'll do.
Okay, so Andrew and I will get that sent over to Linda tomorrow and get it on order. So again, residents who wish to speak tonight during the meeting will be asked to do so through Zoom by one of 2 means. If you are using Zoom on your computer or with an app, please select the raise hand control. Or if you were called into Zoom, press the *9. When it is your turn to speak, the meeting host will enable you to talk. If you are watching this meeting on YouTube or Facebook and wish to respond, please visit henrietta.org/wishyouwerehere for detailed instructions on how to connect on Zoom. For the deaf or hard of hearing, please use the comment feature in Zoom. For anyone else, please reserve the comments for the deaf and hard of hearing only. First up, we have the continuation of public hearing for the proposed local law to revise chicken coop provisions in the Henrietta Town Code. So if you'll recall, or if you didn't recall, you might have read it in the minutes. We went through all the provisions and basically it established what we wanted in terms of setback lines as far as distances from other occupied structures, the number of chickens per, we had 3 different sizes, 3 different maximums depending on the size of the property in the rural residential. For anything in R115 or R120, it was a maximum of 6 chickens. In the rural residential, if you were over an acre but under 2 acres, you could have up to 12 chickens, and then over 2 acres was up to 18 chickens. One of the things you may have noticed difference is Kevin and I were going through this from an implementation standpoint. We realized it's going to require a certificate of occupancy. That residential certificate of occupancy, no matter what it, not occupancy, certificate of compliance. No matter what the use is, the certificate of compliance for residential is $55. So the target total charge we were talking last week was $75. So we adjusted the other two fees to make the total 75. So it's, if for someone who's getting started in chickens, it would be a total of $75. It's $10 for the chicken coop permit, $10 for the chicken license. And then when they're done building the coop and ready to get it inspected, it would be $55 to cover the inspection and the certificate of compliance. At which point they could then have chickens. And there was talk about doing it for every 3 years, and talking with both the building department and the town clerks, it was determined that that was going to be a huge nightmare to try to deal with renewals of every 3 years. And we talked about what was the main purpose of the renewal. And it was to deal with the instance where somebody moves, someone else takes over the house, takes over the chicken coop. So what we decided to do is make it that the license is non-transferable. It can't be transferred from one person to the other or from one property to another. So if somebody moves, down the block, they would need to get a new license for raising chickens at that. And the reason we just did that is to make sure that anyone who's raising chickens has had to come in and get the license and understands what their responsibilities are under the town code. So again, it's only a $10 charge. As far as the permit, that is transferable, assuming that it hasn't been unoccupied for a significant amount of time. So if you buy a house that already has a chicken coop with a CFC on it, you would only have to then pay the $10 license in order to have chickens in that chicken coop. So those were all the changes that, again, based primarily on the feedback from last meeting's public hearing, as well as then as we got into the nitty-gritty and how we were going to implement this, how to make it so that it was the least painful for both the residents and the staff who have to then implement it. So any questions, comments, suggestions?
Makes sense that it's a one-time fee. I like what was done with that.
Current chicken owners?
So current chicken owners, if you're already compliant, you're all set.
Okay, great.
Anybody who is, if your chicken coop is not current, and by compliant, meaning that your chicken coop was built to the standards previously. If you currently have chickens but have never gotten licensed or never got a permit as the way it was done in the past, then we're going to need you to come in. Anything else? As I mentioned, there was a grandfather clause in there so that your chicken coop, as long as it stays kept up, can continue, and you can refurbish it, you can do stuff like that. If you want to enlarge it, it would need to meet the new setback requirements. But we're not going to make everybody go and move their existing chicken coops. If they were previously approved, they're fine with where they're located. Anything else? Anything from the public? There is even public?
There is public. We have our friend Justin from last meeting, but no one has their hand raised, so
Okay.
nothing at this time.
So hearing nothing further, then hearing no objections, I will close the public hearing for the proposed local law to revise chicken coop provisions in the Henrietta Town Code. Public hearing closed. Next public hearing is a proposed local law to amend the Henrietta Town Code to clarify and update provisions relating to town board approval of changes to historic property. So again, as was discussed last week, the town code is ambiguous currently. What it says in an Article 10 vote is after you get Article 10 approval, you can go immediately to issue a building permit, which implies that I don't need to go and get any variances. we're making that explicit. So that if we basically say, if we set in reviewing the Article 10 vote, say, okay, you can build your wheelchair ramp, but it has to stay 25 feet from the front property line, even if that's less than what the zoning code calls for, essentially, we're setting that setback for them. And they can stay within there. Now, if they don't agree, if we choose 25 and they really wanted 20, they do have the right to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and appeal our decision. But the point is, we, for historic properties, and again, the reasoning for this is that for many historic properties, they were built with much smaller setbacks, because a lot of times they were built before there were cars. With that understanding, when people then want to work on the property, and like I said, put in a wheelchair ramp or fix up a porch, they're essentially, they would need to go and get a number of variances. So this allows us to essentially remove a step for them, because they have the added step of having to come in and get the Article 10. The idea is to make that replace having to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Any comment, discussion?
Nothing from over here.
Okay. Hearing no objection, I will close the public hearing for the proposed local law to amend the Henrietta Town Code to clarify and update provisions relating to town board approval of changes to historic property. Public hearing closed. Can I get my first, actually, before we go, I would just like to note, so resolution 13-158, 2020, that was acted on at the workshop on June 8th, 2020. It was to authorize restaurants to apply for temporary outdoor seating through a special event permit. Again, this was another one of those that the code was ambiguous on. We felt that it could be done through there, but just to make sure, since normally outdoor seating comes through the town board, I wanted to make sure the town board was okay with that. But because of the expedience, the governor had just passed a guidance that restaurants could open up outdoor seating. And we had a number of applications. We wanted to get that going Monday so that building and fire prevention could move on those applications. So I just wanted to bring it up because I feel funny about acting on things at a workshop that normally would be done at a town board meeting. We're not doing it to hide it. We're doing it because, again, there was an expediency here for the restaurants, especially since a lot of restaurants are struggling right now.
Yep.
Anything they can do to get additional customers. So one of the things that we're going to have a discussion on at some point with regards to this has to do with if a restaurant gets a special permit for outdoor seating and they close and another restaurant takes over and makes absolutely zero changes to the outdoor seating, do they really need to come back and get another special use permit? That's been the practice. Seems to me if the operation is the same, they shouldn't. Now with the restaurants, as we were talking, restaurants, it's rare that one restaurant closes and another one comes in and opens up in the exact same manner. So that one to me is a bit different, but the outdoor seating, if they're not modifying the area, they're using the exact same area. I'm not clear why that doesn't stick with the building for that particular configuration. But that's not something I want to tackle tonight. I just want to get you guys thinking about that because again, it just seems unnecessary that they come in for. Your battery's dead already?
In charge basically all day today.
Well, that's why we have
We
the
have paper.
printouts because I knew we were having tablet problems. Right. Okay. Any other questions on that? If you had any comments on that, Don? Okay. Can I get my first resolution?
Supervisor Schultz and fellow board members, I have resolution 14-159-2020 to authorize bills payable for today.
Second.
Any discussion? I'll note that it's a larger than normal amount because of the bond payments.
Yeah.
Anything else?
That'll be all.
Hearing actually any discussion or anyone hand raised in the audience? I'll note, as I usually do around this time, that all of our discussions are open to the public. So if anyone in the public viewing wishes to chime in on any resolution we're discussing, please raise your hand and you'll be recognized and called in. Hearing no further discussion, please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Aye.
Councilmember Stafford, oh, sorry, did he say?
You did.
Oh,
Aye.
sorry, I missed it. Councilmember Safranik,
Aye.
Councilmember Bolsner,
Aye.
Supervisor Schultz.
Aye. The suspense was killing me.
Mr. Supervisor, I have Resolution 14-160, 2020, to call for a public hearing regarding lands to be placed in a conservation easement as a part of the proposed Forest View Cluster subdivision.
Seconded.
So I'll open discussion by mentioning our plan is to do this both or either as an open or in public hearing or in-person public hearing, sorry, or a virtual public hearing. We wanted to be able to allow people to attend if they wanted to, but also for people who might be in higher risk class or are otherwise uncomfortable with coming in public, we're still going to have the opportunity for the virtual attendance. Because of that, since the executive order extending the virtual public hearing expires on the 7th, that's why we're having the meeting on the 6th instead of at the town board meeting. So we're going to do it after the workshop meeting instead. The current plan, and again, we'll have all the details on the henrietta.org wish you were here, but the current plan is that we'll have people gather out on the front lawn. We're going to have a big screen out there. They can watch out there, socially distanced, outside where you're not breathing recirculated air. And then what'll happen is if they have a comment, they'll call and we'll have somebody who will basically bring them in. Since how many there are there here, what, 6, 7, so no more than 3 at a time to come in, offer their opinions and then head back out. We just ordered covers for the microphone. So after each speaker, we'll pull the cover off, put the new one on. They were 100 covers for like $10. So
Great.
And our town clerk was very excited because we couldn't get the black ones. The only ones that were available in time were the white with pink polka dots. So she thought that was goofy enough. So any other questions on the current plan to do that?
Is there a plan for rain?
Plan for rain, we're pretty much going to have to, spread out throughout the building. I don't really see a means to bring in a tent or something like that. Not anything that's going to be sizable. So one of the things, as we noted, if for some reason the situation changes and we can't have that in-person hearing, then we would postpone the hearing altogether. That because of the sensitivity of this particular subject, we would not have it be virtual only. One of the things we haven't discussed fully is whether the next 2 also fall into that category, but I'll hold off on that one for now until we get to those ones. But for the Forest View one, we had made the decision that if we can't do in person, we're going to postpone it. Like I said, in terms of rain, we have the new meeting room in the basement where people can spread out some. That's probably what we do is and then have some people up here. Obviously, anybody who is mobility impaired would be up here. Anybody able to use the stairs could be downstairs. So that idea is to spread people out. So. Any other questions on that?
Any public questions?
Any public?
No public comments or
Okay.
questions.
One of the other things, since we're on this subject, I'm going to read essentially the response I'd written to a resident who was asking about the hearing, because it pretty much covers my position from a seeker standpoint. And I want to see if any, I don't know if you guys have read it, but you know, whether you guys feel any different. There it is. Okay, so again, I'm just going to read this and I'll email it so that doesn't have to be transcribed. When someone is looking to do a rezone, we have a lot of latitude as far as approval, because we are making the determination as to whether we think it matches the long-term plan for the town. I'll take a note that this is with respect to somebody who was starting a petition against this particular development. A resident petition saying it does not, is more than enough ammunition to turn something down. We don't actually even need that much unless it were for something like an applicant wanting to rezone to build a senior living facility in an area on the long-term plan that calls for senior living facilities. Twice, when this developer has come into town hall for rezones, both times we've turned him down, saying he won't have my vote. And in talking with Rob and Mike, it was before Lisa and Millie were on the board, I knew they were against it as well. And I think Scott and Rick, previous board members, had already denied him under a previous administration. So I had told the individual that he's welcome to apply, but he's probably going to lose 0 to 5. After trying unsuccessfully for a couple of years to go around the zoning rules, he finally asked me what he has to do to follow the rules. So I showed him the rules in the rural residential zoning district in which this property resides. He complained that he could not get enough homes to make it worthwhile, and I told him those are the rules. He asked whether there was any way to get more houses. Said to do so, you would need to acquire more land. He wouldn't have to own it, but he would have to be able to put a conservation easement on it, because with more land, he can use New York State's clustering laws and take the homes that would be spread across the 100 acres and build them all in close proximity, as long as he puts conservation easements or makes town parks from the remaining lands. And so he talked to his neighbor and purchased the development rights for his land. So now he is following all the zoning laws, and so he cannot be denied because of them. That leaves seeker, which is the State Environmental Quality Review Act, which basically requires us to identify all potential major adverse effects. He must then work to mitigate any of them that we identify. And if he can't, his application is denied. If he can, then his application is approved. For this area, we identified as potential major issues, runoff and drainage. So he hired BME to develop a grading and drainage plan that would minimize the impact from runoff. We asked them to see if they could reduce the current runoff that goes down Ward Hill today, as that was identified by residents in a public hearing as being an issue, thus bringing benefit to the area. They did. And looking at the engineering plans, I see no remaining adverse conditions from drainage. Traffic. This one is actually for the county to be the primary decision maker, since it is a county road. The state can weigh in some, since the road empties onto a state road. Both groups said that this development will have minimal adverse impact, if any, on the traffic conditions on Ward Hill or at the Ward Pinnacle and Ward East Henrietta Road intersections. But because of COVID, they couldn't do current tube counts. So to be safe, we hired a traffic consultant to do a traffic study and to look at the growth that occurred since the previous tube counts, a total of 3 houses in the area. And it's questionable how much of the traffic from those 3 houses even heads south to Ward Hill on a regular basis. But the gist of it was that the traffic from this development will have minimal impact on the area traffic, including during peak travel times when the roads are busiest. Thus, I see no remaining adverse condition from traffic. I will note that someone brought up the possibility of an issue from the town park traffic if an event ended and everyone left at the same time. But that would be part of the seeker process for the cabin, not for the neighborhood. Character of neighborhood. This one's a little more fuzzy than the other two. I can get scientific metrics for traffic and drainage, but I can't get for this one. But I can use some common sense and good judgment. We put this one on here because the original proposal was to build duplexes across the street from a neighborhood full of single-family homes. Now, there's some potential legal challenges denying here because this is not in the middle of the neighborhood, like when we turned down developers from changing phase 3 of a low-density senior housing, low-density senior apartment complex to a medium-density open market apartment complex. That one is quite clear because it was phase 3 of the same development and all immediately adjacent and even intertwined in a few of the areas. But here we are across the street and behind a row of other houses and even set back with a buffer. We're over 600 feet away from the nearest front door of the Long Branch neighborhood. But because they were duplexes, it was at least in the realm of argument. However, after significant pushback from neighbors, the developer agreed to switch from duplexes to single homes. So now I ask, what about this development would change the character of the neighborhood, especially considering there are other neighborhoods around it? I don't see a significant adverse impact to the character of neighborhood. I know people want open space to stay open space. But if that were the case, none of the people living in the Long Branch, Branchbrook area would be living here, nor any of the other neighborhoods in the area. Those were all developed on people's lands. This development follows the updated guidelines for rural residential, which means that they are preserving 50 acres of open farmland and another 30 acres that will become town park land. So about 80 acres of open space is being preserved in exchange for less than 20 acres of developed land. That's a darn good ratio. I know a lot of residents have had issue with this developer, so have we. He can at times be rude, arrogant, and unsympathetic. Unfortunately, none of those can be used as a reason for denying the application. Character of the developer is not one of the categories in seeker. At best, we can increase our inspections to make sure he lives up to what he promises us he's going to build. We've told him that and that those additional costs would be passed on to him. Ultimately, is the planning board that will determine whether he moves forward or not. They are doing the seeker determination, and they are the ones who approve or deny the site plan. We are providing input to the seeker determination, but I do not know how we could provide anything different than the above. What we'll be voting on at the next public hearing is whether the proposed open land is acceptable to the town as required by the zoning laws. In reviewing his plans, we have had them modify it a number of times until it was acceptable, such as not creating new green belts for us to maintain and providing an access road into the land that will become the town park, so we can consider the addition of a parking lot at a minimum and preferably a full-fledged cabin or pavilion in the future. I'm also going to be asking him to put sidewalks along his property frontage on Ward Hill Road in hopes that someday we can continue those down the road and have a sidewalk the full length of Ward Hill Road. So that's essentially where I stand on the seeker standpoint. That's going to be my feedback to the planning board. I don't know if anybody else feels differently, has something that they'd like to add or change that. It's open to the board members, because we've got to get that feedback to them now because their meeting's coming up. They've got to make a seeker determination, up or down.
Well, I just know the residents are really disappointed that they're not homes that are on 5-acre lots. And they still are they're not satisfied with traffic. They're not satisfied with, and maybe that'll be mitigated at the public hearing. So we'll just have to see.
Right.
That's what I have to say about it.
So as far as the not 5-acre lots, again, that's part of New York State clustering laws. They essentially take those 5-acre lots, move all the houses together in smaller lots, and then preserve or open space the open land. That reduces the amount of infrastructure I have to put in place, and reduces the amount of roads you have to put in place, and it creates these large wildlife habitats, or in this case, for the 50 acres, an agricultural farm that is there for basically as long as that easement stays there. And again, our plan is to name 2 organizations on the easement so that both organizations would have to approve for any change to make. For the agricultural one, I was going to be reaching out to the Monroe County Ag and Markets, since it's an agricultural easement. And then for the town park adjacent lands, I was going to reach out to the Henrietta Foundation. So it would be the town and the Monroe County Ag and Markets for the farm, and then the town and the Henrietta Foundation for the park and open space around it.
Well, we did receive the petition with now 300 to 500 names on it. I just asked that be passed on to the planning board for their knowledge also. It should be a very interesting public hearing.
Sure. I will note that, well, actually, just to be clear, they already had their public hearing and their public hearing was closed.
I'm just talking about our.
Oh, ours,
So they
okay,
know.
yeah. The change.org does not do any kind of, I'll just note, it does no kind of verification as to where people live. So the counts that you get from a change.org petition aren't necessarily indicative of what's going on in your town. Just so you're aware.
I haven't seen the names or who's on them or their
Me
addresses.
either.
I've seen none of that.
Correct.
Yeah, it's
Me
hard to get that off a
Just know
change.org
that
one.
There's a lot of people that have concerns about this project.
Right.
Is it ever possible to survey the residents in a particular area such as this, to get an idea as to what all of the residents right there on Ward Hill and in Branch Brook, what their sense on the development is? I mean, it's one thing to have a public hearing. It's something a little bit unbiased, a little bit more unbiased to be able to survey
Right.
the individuals that are actually living there.
We can take a look at that. I will say it's harder to do right now. And that's one of the things the person, he said, the reason he used change.org is because he can't go door to door.
Yeah.
And I get it.
Of course, there's a lot of online surveys and
Right.
online petitions that can be signed and, registered to a particular address, just not change.org.
So,
I don't know, as Don, is if they get that, is there any
no,
basis upon law that can affect that? Go ahead.
no, I think that doing something like that is actually dangerous because
Okay.
there are specific standards upon which this development is supposed to be addressed. And it's not, do we like the guy who's building the houses? It's, whether there's sufficient egress and ingress, whether, it meets the density requirements unless you have a subdivision cluster, whether it's compliant with zoning, those kinds of things. And then there's seeker, all the stuff that Steve mentioned with traffic and drainage and things like that. If we start, and I've seen this happen in other places where a town will, or municipality will say, hey, look, we're going to do this extra thing over here. We're going to have 10 public hearings instead of the one that's required. Then the developer will say unequal treatment, unequal application of the law. Then you have yourself a constitutional issue. So, we really need to act within the confines of the law. It protects us by doing it that way. Now, if the residents want to go out and obtain signatures or rally and bring people to the public hearing or write letters or anything like that, that's all input the town could take into consideration. But if the town affirmatively went out and started surveying people for this particular application, but we didn't do it for any other applications, now you're setting yourself up for a problem if the town's sponsoring it.
Thank you, Don.
Don, I have a question, and this is just a general question. It's not related to this project in particular, but just and you mentioned if you like the developer or not, or you like the builder or not. If a builder or developer has not lived up to their, let's say other developments that they've made, have not lived up to what they promised the residents there, I know it's a civil matter between them and the new residents, the new homeowners and them, but is there anything that the town can do to try to prevent a developer from coming in or a builder from coming in again? Because if there's, and once again, I'm not speaking of any development in particular, if a development is bad, I think the town owes something to the new residents to new people to protect them.
So you're making a distinction between a land use decision and almost registering developers or something like that, where you're vetting the actual people that are part of the development team. You can imagine how much of an undertaking that might be. And it would be possibly, arguably easy to get around, right? You make a shell corp and have someone else own it. I don't know, but I think theoretically, maybe, I don't know. But when we're dealing with rezones and site plans and subdivisions, we're dealing with land use. We're not dealing with the developer, himself or herself. And a lot of times they're doing it through, they'll make a separate corporation for each development. It just starts to get really complicated. Certainly if there are criminal acts involved, that's something the town can seek to prosecute. If there are code violations involved, that's something the town can seek to prosecute. If there are bad deals made between two private parties, that's something that's more difficult for the town to be involved in.
And then what would prevent a developer from saying, hey, I'm going to build $1 million homes on this piece of property, and then really only develop a home that's worth, let's say, $200,000, and then they sell them for $200,000. What do we have, is there anything that a town has to prevent that?
So you're saying that you want to restrict developers by the value of the homes they want to build?
No, they just promise one thing and deliver another.
If it's within the confines of the land use decision, then yeah, you can certainly enforce that.
So in other words, if the land use and the approval had specific conditions in it, then you can. If they just, we're going to build, so some of it where we're going to build high-end homes.
Right.
What does that mean?
Right, and you could, a developer could say, well, I thought I was going to get $1 million for this home, but I'm only going to get 200,000 because it's not worth $1 million. It's not worth $1 million. And
You're typically not looking
they
at,
make a lot of promises. Well, then I don't understand why they bring that up.
yeah, you're looking at use and dimensional things usually, the size of it or whether it's going to be single or multifamily, how tall is it going to be, things like that. So someone, if he says, I'm going to build a 2,000 square foot home and it's a 500 square foot home, you got something there. If he says I'm going to build 3-story and it's 10-story, you got something there. If he says usually you're not.
And I do think I've seen, in fact, I think there might have been that true for Long Branch, Branch Brook, that there was a square foot minimum as part of the site plan.
Most of them are.
That you can't, that they propose. So again, going back to Don's point, if they say it, to get closer to $1 million, that has to be a 6,000 square foot home minimum, and they build a 1,000 square foot home, that you could say, sorry, that's not what your plan was approved for, and never get issued a C of O.
But as we know, we could, the square footage is not the only thing that dictates the price. I mean, it's a big part of it, but at the same time, you could make a 2,000 square foot home a lot cheaper or a lot more expensive.
Well, you still have your land costs.
Right.
Land costs are a huge cost. So if you were to develop it, I'm not speaking from a realtor, I'm sorry, maybe I shouldn't. But if you were to develop it, your land costs, you're going to lose money. A builder's not going to do that. I mean, go from $1 million to 200,000. He's going to lose so much money. It doesn't even make sense for him to do it, to build it. He's better off leaving the land.
Can you pull your mic closer?
Sorry.
No problem. I'm just not hearing.
I was just using $1 million for a figure. Let's say, let's say 300,000 to 200,000.
Yeah.
Let's say.
Most of the new construction that I've been involved in, there's been a limit to this, how small it can be. It can't be any smaller than that. So.
There's been a number of developments that phase 1, they have this amount of home, and then they say phase 2, we're going to build upscale around this amount, and it doesn't happen. They come back in and say, oh, the market doesn't dictate that, or here's what the market's calling for now. And so it's changed and it flies.
So again, that gets into when you do those approvals, that it's important to stipulate. And again, this board has already done that with respect to the legacy, where the developers came in and tried to change out what they were going to build, and we said no. You know, unfortunately, sometimes, in my opinion, previous administrations were too lax in that. The key is for us to stay strong on it. Now, I also don't want to be completely inflexible and see stuff rot, right? But, you know, you've got to, so, you know, again, that goes back to why this is a discretionary board, so we can exercise discretion. But, you know, one of the things when we talk about with that stuff is if they want to change something that's in that approval, they have to come back and get it essentially reapproved, get okay. They can't just do it. They need to get approval for that.
Part of it, you know, part of this is, you know, the board can ask questions. A lot of times you'll hear a board member, be it a planning board, zoning board, or your town board, say, just out of curiosity, question, right? So, you know, are you going to bind them to that answer if it's just out of curiosity? Because if it's just out of curiosity, it's not a binding material answer, I guess is what I'm getting at. So if you say just out of curiosity, how much are the homes going to sell for? Well, I'm thinking 200,000-300,000. That's different than saying, conditioning your approval on selling a $200,000 or $300,000 home, which isn't typically a factor in a land use decision, right? You don't typically say these houses have to sell for this amount of money, but you can sort of get there in some ways by defining they've got to be this big, or the lots have to be this size, and so on and so forth. You can get partially there that way, but that's not usually something you don't see in a code, for example, that the value of the house is something that comes into play. Care to the neighborhood and seeker does, and sometimes there's other things that you can kind of get there with, but you know, we have to make sure that we're using the tools that we're given in order to have our decisions be upheld. But when we go outside of those bounds and ask questions out of curiosity, then the question becomes whether the answer is something we rely upon to make our determination. Because there is a theory of law where if your decision is based on fraudulent information or untruthful information that's material and relevant, there's a question as to whether you can then turn that over or avoid it. So then the question is whether the value of the house is a material relevant thing or not. That's kind of in a roundabout way what I'm getting at, if that makes any sense.
But it's also why, as you look at some of the approvals we've done, and I'll use Dunwood Green as example, we added what, 5-6 stipulations in there that said, you know, we made clear what we considered to be material. They can't go back on those things, or else they lose their approval. So, you know, that's the key, is if there is something you consider to be approval, don't just ask it as an offhand question. Make it clear that this is important and that we are planning to, or at least you're planning to recommend that we make that a stipulation of the approval. And then we spell it right out in the approval so there's no ambiguity, because that's one of the problems is, so again, I'll give you an example. Rivers Run, when they built that senior housing there, they came in, they talked about it, how we're building senior housing, they got approved for senior housing. The approval resolution never mentioned senior housing. So now you could potentially go back and say, because, oh, by the way, it's no longer senior housing, and say that you don't have approval to make that change. It gets into the argument that, well, nothing in the approval letter said senior housing. The whole discussion was about senior housing. So again, if I'm going back to what Don's saying, I would say, yeah, that was clearly material. But boy, it'd be black and white if it were spelled right out in the approval for senior housing, right? And they specifically have one portion was for independent senior living, and the other one was for assisted senior living. The problem is, now that happened before we came on board, they allow that to change. and it had a material effect on all of the townhouses in there. And all those residents, their house values were underwater because when they bought them, they were townhouses in a senior living area that had a large senior living facility with a bunch of amenities. When they converted that tower to student living, all those amenities went away to cram more students in there. And now the values dropped tremendously on all those people's homes. That's the kind of thing that we've got to protect. That's the kind of thing we have to make sure that it's spelled out in stipulation, because to Mike's point, that's not fair to those residents, especially the residents who purchased those homes expecting one thing, and then 2, 3, 4 years later, it gets completely switched on them.
So my last thing to the planning board, because as a town board member, I don't have any jurisdiction to give them any advice on what they decide.
You do have.
I think they're qualified to do their job.
Well, no, you said you don't have jurisdiction. You do. We are an involved agency, so you can provide input, but it's up to them to.
I would just give them all the information that I have for them to make the decision.
Sure.
But I don't have any way of swaying by saying what I feel. They have to make that decision on their own as the independent board. So I just want to make sure they have all the information that's out there. They'll make their decision.
I agree, but again, I will tell you that they consider your opinion an important factoid. It may not change their decision, it may change their decision, that's up to them, because as you point out, they are independent. But again, they do want to hear that opinion. So if anybody has anything that they want to add in addition to what I've written, please send it to me, send it straight to the planning board. However, send it to Jim Gruner, the chair, however you want to get it to them, but we need to do that soon because at their next meeting, they're going to be making a secret determination.
Just for purposes of a clean record, I would say that the board should make a motion to defer lead agency to the planning board. I don't know if that's been officially done. I don't know if the 30 days have passed, but I think that makes it clean.
Yeah, so there was some confusion as to the level of the
Seeker review?
The level of the seeker review.
Yeah.
And so that's been clarified. I'm fine with taking a vote now. The town board had the planning board had declared their intent to be lead agency. They're the ones who approve. Again, there's no special permit needed for us. The only thing we have to approve is whether the open space is acceptable to the town and meets the goals of the town, which again, we're preserving 50 acres of farmland, so it meets the farmland protection portion of the plan. It increases our park space and it 80% open land.
So this vote is after the public hearing?
That vote's after the public hearing. Don's talking about right now, the planning board basically had declared its intent to be lead agency. We could argue that and say we want to be lead agency if we wanted to. Don was just saying that we ought to just take a vote right now to say whether we defer lead agency to the planning board.
What do we normally do? I know we usually I know we vote on the seeker. Normally do we?
So when they declare their intent to be lead agency, again, usually what that happens is if it involves a special permit, we are generally lead agency. If it doesn't involve a special permit, the planning board is lead agency because of the site plan. If it's small, it's not even done as a coordinated review.
Maybe that.
Right. So
This is a strange one
this is a strange
the
one.
open space incentive option, which is being used here, I've never seen it used in town in the past 5 years, which doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. It just hasn't been exercised. So in this case, you do have, some authority by way of that open space option, but the majority of the work is being done at the planning board level.
So if you look at it from, there's an involved agency and what is the other one? Interested.
Yeah.
And so interested just means you're literally interested in what's happening and you might want to apply some opinion. Involved means you're part of the decision-making process. So for instance, Monroe County DOT is an involved agency because it's a county road. New York State DOT would be an interested party because of their intersection at East Henrietta Road. They're not involved, they don't have any say in the matter, but they are interested and can offer opinions on the traffic study. Where, because of the open space, we are an involved agency, whereas normally we're an interested agency if it doesn't involve any kind of special permit. So that's what Don's saying is the unusual one. If there was a special permit, because that starts the process, then we're the lead agency on those ones. So this is just an unusual case where our open space is not the start of the process. It's not the major hurdle that they have to overcome. It's, again, whether that they've put a plan together that matches how we would like the open space to be.
And oftentimes when there's a declare intent to be lead agency, when 30 days passes, then that agency just becomes lead agency by operation of law. You don't need to defer typically, but in this case, given the scheduling, it just makes it cleaner and more direct to say, yeah, we're on the record saying we defer to you doing the secret work.
Don, can I interject real quick? Are you thinking this is going to be just a separate motion, isolated, not part of a resolution, or adding it as a clause in this resolution that's on the table? Or I just want to be.
So my suggestion would be, let's finish the resolution on the table and then someone can make a separate motion to deal with seeker.
Okay, I will be the one to make that motion to deal with seeker, but any other discussion on the resolution on the table, which is to call for the public hearing?
No.
Any comments from the public?
No public comments.
Steve, the only question I do have on the public hearing is, we'll have the public hearing, and are we going to do what we normally do, or some want to do normally is wait until the next meeting for the vote?
So in terms of that totally depends. So on what we usually do is, so for a significant decision like a zoning decision, we made the decision that we will always wait. For a lot of these other ones, it's based off of feedback, that if we don't hear, depending on what we hear, if there isn't, so for instance, the chicken coop, because there were a number of questions regarding it, we pushed it off a week. We've heard absolutely zero discussion, no pushback against the change on the historic property. I intend to vote on that one tonight. So it will depend on what we hear. I am expecting that we will hear stuff, and so we will not want to act on it tonight. It will be the last resolution on the agenda. That way it just falls off if we decide not to act on it that night. But again, I'm not saying we are or are not. That's up to us based off of the feedback of the public hearing.
Thank you.
Anything else on this? Hearing no further discussion, please call a roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Aye.
Councilmember Stafford,
Aye.
Councilmember Safranik,
Aye.
Councilmember Bolzner,
Aye.
Supervisor Schultz.
Aye. Would this be a resolution or just
Just make a verbal
motion? Okay,
resolution.
I make a motion to call for a vote to defer lead agency to the planning board with regards to the proposed Forest View cluster subdivision. Anyone going to second?
Second.
Discussion?
I would like to defer my vote until after the public hearing. I'd like to hear what's going to happen from our residents before I vote on this. But if you want to vote, I'll vote against it. And if it carries, it carries.
Do we have any input from the planning board as to their preference or where they're at with their review of this subdivision?
So what I will do is I'll first call on Chris Martin, who's the Director of Planning and well, engineering and planning, and works with the planning board in that regards. Chris?
There. Yeah, so this has already been to planning board for their public hearing. They received a lot of input and comments from the residents as well as some of the other board members. You know, I think we'll probably be ready to do seeker at the next planning board meeting, which is Tuesday night.
We also have a member of the planning board in Deputy Town Supervisor Craig Eckert. Craig, I don't know if you want to add anything from the planning board standpoint. Obviously, you can't speak for the whole board, but you could certainly speak for yourself. Or you can decline. Or you can take your
Can't hear us.
mute off.
Probably can't hear us.
Craig?
Or Craig.
Craig?
Craig, you're muted. Let me see if I can.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, there, yeah.
It was
Sorry, I
reacting.
thought I was waiting on you to unmute me. Thank you, sir. I know we've gone through this quite extensively with the planning board. Again, I have not met with the other planning board members. We have discussed this internally at great length, and the potential outcome and the disturbance to the environment and to the community based off this development. So I have not communicated with the other planning board members. I think we were waiting to communicate after this meeting and the public hearing. Chris, confirm, is the public hearing still open for planning board, or did we close that?
No, the public hearing is closed, Craig. And I guess something I'd also like to add is, you know, we did have a neighborhood meeting for this project, and we had also a concept meeting as well. So, you know, we've had at least 3 meetings, you know, with the planning board on this project.
Correct. I am aware that a petition was being circulated hand by hand. That I have asked to see if where that resides. I haven't seen that yet. I was hoping that was going to be available to you tonight, but I'm not sure where that's coming from. I'm just aware of its existence, and therefore the paper copy would be assigned a petition of where the signatures are from.
Yeah, the only petition that's been shared with us was from change.org.
Correct. Yeah, I remember talking to you about that yesterday, sir.
So this resolution is just for us to decide if
The
the planning
motion-
board was going to be, this
Right.
motion was just to decide if the planning board was going to be the lead agency.
Correct.
It
With
has nothing to
seeker?
do with, it has nothing to do with the land conservation easement.
No. This is whether we wish to challenge them and say we want to be lead agency. I don't know what happens if we do.
If either we solve it or court gets to decide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is the first I'm hearing about this part tonight, so
Well, that's because, again,
I'm not saying.
no, I know, I'm just saying, when we talked about it at the last meeting, I thought they had already declared lead agency. I thought that had already gone by. But there was some confusion as to whether there's some weird things in the seeker laws. So if this were a commercial project, there's no question it would have been above the automatic threshold for type 1 action based on square footage. For residential properties, it's not based off of square footage, which I find strange. It's based off the number of units. The number of units is below the threshold for a type 1 action. Type 1 actions automatically require a coordinated review. So it's what's called an unlisted action. It does not require coordinated review. However, at the previous meeting, again, I was under the impression it was a type 1 because, again, for any other type of commercial one this size, it automatically was. This is the first time we've ever, the other thing I'll point out, we don't usually see these. They never come to us because we have no input on it. This is the only reason we have input on this one is because of this open space.
Right.
So it's our first time ever encountering this, and it's where we're at.
So the motion on the table is to defer to the planning board so that they would be the lead agency.
Correct.
And that's just so that there's no question going forward as to who's supposed to be the lead agent.
Correct.
Yeah, we'd be assenting to their request because they've asked to be lead agency.
I see.
And the reason I want you to do it on the record is because if there's a lot of people that are opposing this and looking at it closely, I want the record to be clear as to how we're proceeding.
They can't come along later and sue and say, well, you never consented to them being lead agency and therefore their whole secret determination was invalid because you guys should have been lead agency, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
So it's just to clear that up, whether we agree. Again, if it wasn't for this open space, we wouldn't even be an involved agency. We'd be an interested agency.
So my feeling is that the planning board was put there for a purpose, and we've given them a job to do, and I just feel they put a lot of work into it. To take it away from them at this point just doesn't make any sense.
I would concur. Any other opinions before we move to vote? Heard Rob's, I don't know if you've got any.
They normally do this. That's, so based on that, that's how I believe I'm going. Is there any questions by any chance coming in from outside?
No, I just got something about
Okay.
the petition. Hold on one second. I'm just trying to find out what the count is on that handwritten petition. Somebody who,
They said, I don't know about the handwritten petitions, what they got, because
Right.
of COVID, that all got,
I understand that.
yeah.
But the person who was circulating the handwritten one just texted me, they prefer their name not be shared. So I'm just trying to get the number.
Okay.
But like I said, the large numbers you're hearing from moveon.org, or excuse me, not moveon.org, change.org. That one is,
Anyone in the world could have signed it.
right. Could be Russians, bots.
Mhm.
So they're trying to get that number. Hold on.
Okay.
Is there an argument to be made that the town board should be lead agency, or is it really best to leave it in the hands of the
So
planning board?
from my standpoint, again, because if it weren't for the open space, we wouldn't even be involved.
Mhm.
This is what they do on a regular basis. This is the whole reason the planning board is constituted. They've got a ton of experience on this. This is the first of these type of site plans that we've come across, right? So, again, the problem with this particular one is it is controversial. Okay, I've got the number. There's currently 40 from the neighborhood. They said it is, obviously COVID makes it difficult to collect it, but they currently have 40 signatures. So that will be submitted to the planning board as part of their secret determination, assuming that we defer. Don, I don't know if you want to add anything in terms of.
I mean, I could craft an
Privacy.
argument for either side here,
Right.
right? I mean,
Of course you can, you're a lawyer.
My
You love
question,
to argue.
my question would be, if we change it up now, how it normally is done. We don't let planning board be the lead. It would probably be a good argument that we change the rules for this one.
Well, I don't-
One project. Is
you have the
that-
right to do it. I guess my
I'm asking. I'm just.
Yeah, no, you have the right to do that. I guess my position is it's exceedingly rare to have that happen. Typically when one board of a town requests lead agency, it's not the town that takes it away. It's some other agency that might want to jump in on it from outside the town. So, you don't typically see two boards in the same town. It happens once in a while, but you don't typically see the two boards sort of vying for lead agency. Pretty rare. It's always nice to be in sort of in control of things. So, that would be an argument for the town board to do it. But the planning board has requested it. And so the position the town board is in is it defers, in which case the planning board will carry out. It does nothing, in which case 30 days from their request, they automatically become lead agency. Or it challenges and says, I want to be lead agency, at which point now you've got something to talk about and hopefully work out.
What was the date they requested? This?
I'm not sure offhand.
Previous meeting.
It was May 28th.
May?
Yeah, May 28th. It was a Thursday.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
shit, okay.
we're in June.
Okay, any other comment, or should we call on a vote on the motion?
But just call a vote.
I'm ready to vote.
My only comment is I'll be voting in favor of it because that is our normal procedures. That's their job.
Okay, Becky, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Barley,
I abstain.
Councilmember Stafford,
Aye.
Councilmember Safranik,
Aye.
Councilmember Bolsner,
Before, I just want to understand, we're voting whether we want to take it over, whether we're keeping it with them.
This is for them to
For them to
defer,
take
and
it.
I means
They don't
they
have
keep it.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to be
Yep.
sure.
Supervisor Schultz.
Aye. The motion carries, so we are officially deferring to their request to be lead agency. They do not need to wait the 30 days for our approval. Okay, anything else on that before we move on to the next resolution?
Mr. Supervisor, can I suggest we ask our translator if she needs a break? We've been at it for an hour or so now.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Lisa, I think you're up next.
Supervisor Schultz, I have resolution 14-161, 2020, to authorize Bergman Associates, DPC, to provide professional design services for the Henrietta Town Court architectural plans.
Second.
Any discussion?
Just want to, make sure that those people who were watching the other day, this is just to get the plans in place in case we decide to build in a hurry. It's
Yeah.
building it today or tomorrow.
Yeah, so again, to Mike's point, because of the pandemic, so originally we were gonna build this do the construction with the surplus from last year, because that surplus is going to be essentially applied to, or the majority of that surplus is going to be applied to make up for the revenue shortfalls of this year. We are not planning on building it. However, we would like to have the plans in place in case any stimulus money comes down and they're looking for shovel-ready projects. I want to be able to hand them the court and say, let's build it. So obviously, if money falls from the sky, I'm happy to build it, but I'm not going to, you like that sign for money falls from the sky?
Yeah, I like that.
You want me to say it a few more times? I want that to be ready so that we can build, if that should happen. But otherwise, we would look at putting it as part of next year's budget, or again, it may be the way we were planning on this year, we didn't incorporate it into the budget. We were going to do it based off of excess revenues.
Makes a lot of sense.
Any other discussion? Anything from the public?
No public comment.
Hearing no further comment, please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Aye.
Councilmember Stafford,
Aye.
Councilmember Safranik,
Aye.
Councilmember Bolsner,
Aye.
Supervisor Schultz.
Aye.
Mr. Supervisor, I have resolution 14-162, 2020, to call for a public hearing regarding the establishment of an extension 169 to to the Henrietta Water District 1 for Lehigh Park 2.
Second. So this one and the next one, the next resolution will be for sewer district. This is what you could almost call a pro forma resolution. You know, it gets into one of these questions of when we approve the the special use permit, should we also at that point look at doing this?
Right.
Because it kind of puts you in a strange spot. You've given them the permit, they've started construction. You can't then turn around and say, no, you can build all the apartments you want, you just can't hook up the water or sewer. Right. We would get sued all day in court and we would probably lose all day in court. So, you know, it's something we might want to look procedurally if there's a way to do that as part of the special use permit. I don't know. Do it the same night at least, right?
Because by the time you've done the special use permit, you've done seeker.
Right.
Which would be most of the reasons why you would deny something like that anyways.
Right. Any other comments, questions?
Just let me go back. The date of that public hearing.
It's the same as the other one. In fact, I told them from a schedule standpoint, I probably want to do these ones first so we can
Yeah.
get them done and out of the way.
Yep.
There may be some people from the Florendon neighborhood who wants to voice objection because again, they're not happy about Lehigh Park 2.
Gotcha.
But it's one of those that, you know, again, that time was back when we were doing the special use permit. Right. Any other discussion?
No, sir.
Hearing none, please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Aye.
Councilmember Stafford,
Aye.
Councilmember Safranek,
Aye.
Councilmember Bolzner,
Aye.
Supervisor Schultz.
Aye. Fellow board members, I have resolution 14-163, 2020, to call for a public hearing regarding the establishment of extension number 221 to the Henrietta Sewer District number 1 for Lehigh Park 2.
Second.
So again, same thing as the last one, as you'll notice, we do everything within a sewer district, one sewer district, but we have extensions. So basically, once that's on there, I believe on these ones, the unit is as in a housing unit, residential housing unit, so they will be paying whatever that residential per unit charges. Or if it's considered, that's if they're individual units. If it's a single large thing, then they typically so the water's obviously by water consumed. The sewer is it's typically just by, again, I think it was $35 per household. For like commercial places, it's actually, you monitor the water going in, and that's how much they have to pay for the sewer going out. There's a few exceptions to that. The Oregon freeze dried, because we knew they were going to generate a lot more water than they actually used. We were monitoring their water discharge, but for residential, it's typically per residential unit. I don't know, Chris or Becky, can you answer that for apartment complexes?
I think apartment complexes are also by unit, but I believe it's a reduced rate than it would be for a single-family home. I'm sure my colleague could probably clarify that.
Unfortunately, my sewer buddy Jenny has left for the evening, so I would defer to Jenny. She can add a town clerk's note to these minutes later.
Yeah, when I look at if you go to the tax tables, I don't see a separate rate. I only see the one residential unit rate. So unless their unit count is reduced, I don't know that they do have a reduced rate. I think it's, because again, in the tax tables, there's a single consolidated sewer charge. It's $35 per unit, and the unit is household unit. So, but again, Jenny can make that clear in the minutes. Any other discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
I'm sorry, I'm going to just quickly note that the apartment sewer bills are calculated by the number of rentable units multiplied by the residential sewer rent rate. But let me call the roll. That's what you asked for.
Yep.
Councilmember Barley,
Aye.
Councilmember Stafford,
Aye.
Councilmember Safranek,
Aye.
Councilmember Bolzner,
Aye.
Supervisor Schultz.
Aye.
Mr. Supervisor and fellow board members, I have resolution 14-164, 2020 to authorize disposition of obsolete town records per MU-1 schedule.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Aye.
Councilmember Stafford,
Aye.
Councilmember Safranek,
Aye.
Councilmember Bolzner,
Aye.
Supervisor Schultz.
Aye.
Mr. Supervisor, I have Resolution 14-165, 2020 to designate the property at 284 Brooks Road as a historic site.
Seconded.
So if you remember, we had the public hearing sometime back. We've closed the public hearing, but because there had been a concern raised there, we sent it back to, we wanted an updated recommendation from the Historic Site Committee before we made our determination. They looked at the property. They felt that it was indicative of the post-war era style of architecture. I won't say it was unique, but one of the things that is different here than with many other houses from that era is this house has not been significantly expanded or modified from its original architecture. And so, you look at a lot of them, they've added front porches or re-sided or changes the windows. It's changed a lot from how they first appeared. So this one is, they felt it was worthy of the designation because it was typical of that era, that style of architecture. The requirement under state law to be considered historic is 50 years. In this case, it's, 64 years? So it meets that requirement. I will note that as I am very familiar with the property owner, as she is a neighbor, lives directly across the street from me. I will be recusing myself from abstaining from the vote, not recusing. So, any questions? I don't know if Tina is on, who might be able to answer any additional questions if we needed, but.
No questions from me.
Questions.
Okay, any questions from the public?
No questions from the public. But
Okay,
we do have Tina on standby.
okay. But sounds like we've gotten the question answered. So, hearing no further discussion, please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Aye.
Councilmember Stafford,
Aye.
Councilmember Safranek,
Aye.
Councilmember Bolzner,
Aye.
Supervisor Schultz.
Abstain. I think, Lisa, you're up.
Supervisor Schultz, I have resolution 14-166, 2020 to hire personnel.
Second.
So we're adding a bunch of seasonals employees to try to get caught up on the mowing. We normally have seasonals already hired by this point, but obviously the pandemic changed that schedule. So as a number of residents who live next to greenbelts know, we're not able to get to them at the rate we would like to. So this will help address that.
The grass is really growing.
Yep. Any other comments, questions? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Aye.
Councilmember Stafford,
Aye.
Councilmember Safranek,
Aye.
Councilmember Bolzner,
Aye.
Supervisor Schultz.
Aye.
Mr. Supervisor, I have Resolution 14-167, 2020, to adopt local law number 1 of 2020 to amend the Henrietta Town Code at Chapter 295, Section 52.3, entitled Chicken Coops, so as to update and clarify regulations and procedures relating to chicken coops and adjust associated fees.
Second. Any discussion beyond what we had at the public hearing?
No, sir.
Any additional comment from the public?
No public comment.
Hearing none, please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Aye.
Councilmember Stafford,
Aye.
Councilmember Safranek,
Aye.
Councilmember Bolzner,
Aye.
Supervisor Schultz.
Aye. Fellow board members, I have resolution 14-168, 2020, to adopt local law number 2 of 2020 to amend the Henrietta Town Code to clarify and update provisions relating to town board approval of changes to historic properties.
Second.
By the way, I will note that it's amazing that it's June and we're having local law number 1 in 2.
Right.
I was wondering, at first I wondered if that was a mis.
Yeah.
Wow.
Any further discussion beyond what we had at the public hearing? Anything from the public?
Nothing from the public.
Hearing no further discussion, please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Aye.
Councilmember Stafford,
Aye.
Councilmember Safranek,
Aye.
Councilmember Bolzner,
Aye.
Supervisor Schultz.
Aye. That concludes our resolutions. Do we have any additional public comments?
We do not.
Do we have any committee or miscellaneous reports?
Just that tomorrow there is a food drive, isn't it planned for?
Correct.
At the rec center again.
It's
Is that a
more
food
specifically food
distribution?
distribution, it's Food Link.
Oh, yeah, right.
Right. Not food collection, it's food distribution.
Unless people wanted to.
We don't
Food-
want to.
No, you don't want to deal with it. No, food distribution.
Yeah, so again, go to Food Link to sign up if you haven't already. Seems like we've done a whole lot of these distributions, and Food Link, by the way, has commented multiple times that our distribution was by far the best organized of any of them that they've done. So I don't know if they said best by far. That might have been editorial addition, but
It did go, it went very smooth.
it did. They were impressed.
It was very smooth, I thought.
I will also give a couple other updates. So we've been making plans for the reverse parade, which will be held June 27th. Jason, correct me if I get that wrong. From 10 to 2. Again, for those unfamiliar with the concept of a reverse parade, in a normal parade, the spectators are stationary along the parade route and the exhibitors go by. In a reverse parade, the exhibitors are going to be stationary and the spectators are going to drive by in their cars. It's a way to do a COVID-safe parade. One of the things we're doing because of we're one of the few towns doing this because we're potentially having ground-based fireworks there. We are trying to reserve it for residents only. Since we're going to have some of the representatives from the various schools there saying as a chance to say goodbye and thank you to their students who might be driving by. We're opening it up to anyone in the Rush Henrietta School District, not just Henrietta residents, but we ask that you go to our website, go to the Parks Department and register there. That way you can then just have you can print out the sheet or have it electronically. It's just going to be our way to essentially try to make sure that we're not inundated from folks from outside the town, so that as many people who wish to can get through and see this. It's sort of combining our Memorial Day and Independence Day celebrations. So there will be a number of events geared towards honoring and remembering our veterans, as well as I mentioned, the fireworks. The fireworks are not a 100% done deal. We're doing a test. I do not wish to say the time of the test because I don't want a bunch of people showing up. But we are just going to do a test fire to make sure that they are visible enough, the fire are visible enough in the daytime to make it worth the expenditure. We've got a lot of the acts that were in our normal parade. The Parks and Rec team has done a really good job in that regards. We've got some interesting stuff and it should be fun. We have a homebrew safety mask. If you were at those old enough, you might remember the Men Without Hats song, Safety Dance. Some members of the town staff are going to be doing a performance of Safety Mask, which is a COVID retelling of that song, of the lyrics of that song. So someone asked, are we encouraging people to decorate their cars? I said encouraging is a strong word. We are inviting people to decorate their cars, and we'll celebrate anyone who does, who wants to, as they're driving through, you know, have something on it, signs, float, whatever. No trailers. You know, just, but if you want to decorate your car, you're more than welcome to. Obviously no stopping, no getting out of the cars. We're going to have pictures of the outstanding scholars or youth, what's it called, Youth Hall of Fame.
Yeah, the Hall of Fame.
So there, we're going to have those along the parade route. I will encourage any parents to not stop and take the pictures during the parade. You can come after the parade is over, get out, get a picture of yourselves and your kid next to his picture, and then you'll actually be able to take the picture home with you. We're going to make use of campaign frames, put them to use.
That's great.
To get them out there,
Right.
if they don't already come with frames themselves. So
Make sure we keep.
that's right. Yeah,
We'll keep the-
we're keeping the frames, but you can have the picture. Jason, can you think of anything else that I've missed on that?
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but I think I overheard you saying the time was 10 until 2. The actual time is 10 a.m. until noon.
Till noon.
Oh, noon. Sorry. Thank you.
And there is,
10 to 2 are the distributions that we've done so many. So.
and we are requiring pre-registration, and the only way for residents to register currently is through our website on our online registration page.
If you have an issue with that, for some reason can't do it, give me a call. We'll figure out a way. And then the other thing, there's been a question about playgrounds. So last week on the call with the county and on the call with, we had a representative from the governor's office. I kind of asked, is there some way we can do reopen playgrounds in some way, shape, or form? You know, I didn't want to be the only town that opened it because, again, as we saw when things were closing, we were the last dog park to close. So many people came from elsewhere. It was the dog park was overcrowded, and so on the call with the other supervisors, there's a lot of towns who are doing it. Some have already started. They're essentially play at risk. Our safety officer, Chuck Marshall, is looking at a cleaner that can basically be applied, in theory, every 10 days. I figured we would just pick a day of the week, do it on a 7-day cycle. It alters the pH level of the surface so that it is less prone to hold viruses, but it is non-toxic and child safe. he's going through that in detail to make sure that they're true to their claims. And if so, that's what we're probably going to look at. It will still be used at your own risk. We are not going to be able to wipe down the stuff between, if a parent wants to wipe down, have their kids, that's up to them. I'm not about to tell parents how to parent. It's up to them whether they take a risk. I know, for instance, I have a friend who had heart surgery. There's no way she can take her kids there for risk, but there's other people who might not see that as a potential risk. We're trying to do, as much as we can to make it safe. We also understand that kids are going stir crazy, which then in turn parents are going stir crazy. So we're trying to accommodate it as best we can. We're looking at a couple different options, and as soon as those are ready, we'll announce them. My plan was to do that as part of phase 3, which hopefully goes into effect either this Friday or early next week.
Yeah.
So, but we'll let you know, like I said, as soon as it's available. Anything else that you can think to add to that, Jason?
No, that sounds good, Steve. Thank you.
One other thing, we've also been looking at doing a summer day camp, so that for parents who have to go back to work, they would have a affordable place to take their kids. Unfortunately, we had a setback last night. I was informed that the superintendent of the Rush Henrietta Central School District is recommending to his board that they not allow us to use their facilities. And I understand that there was a board vote taken in an executive session that denied it. I will be getting details tomorrow. But if people can start thinking about some alternate locations where we might be able to do it, I reached out to RIT to see if any of their classrooms are available. Unfortunately, their school starts less than a week after the end date for the stuff. So we're still going to look to see if we can use, for instance, the RIT and Conference Center, or some other potential facilities. But, I asked people out there to start thinking about where we might be. The classrooms have to be a particular size. They have to, there's a lot of requirements, but the issue you get into is, so like someone said, what about the dome? It's not currently being used. The problem is it's one large space. To do it safely, you have to, there's a maximum of 10 students and 2 proctors, I don't know what you call them. Counselors, per classroom, maximum. And, you can use public space like a gym. However, each classroom, in other words, so we were looking at doing it like 5 classrooms at each of the schools, because basically then classroom 1 would have the gym on Monday, classroom 2 would have the gym on Tuesday, et cetera, and so forth. But unfortunately, like I said, the superintendent is recommending that we not do that, which I think is a shame, because there's a lot of parents who need affordable daycare, and this was affordable. I don't know what they're going to do, if they're going to be able to go back to work. If they can't go back to work, what's that do for their kids in terms of feeding their kids? So again, I'm very disappointed, and we'll have to figure out where we go from there. So
Yeah, I think it's a shame to hear about this too, because I know a lot of people depend on that, and that was, would be a great program for people and kids, parents and their children getting them back to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm somebody that depends on that, so.
So we're still working to see what we can do. We're looking at, we obviously don't have as much facilities as the school district does. We have some, but because of this limited size of the classrooms in terms of the number of people in it, it's very limiting as to what we can do. We'll go from there.
Just wondering, I don't know if the schools even know what they're going to do for their own students when school's supposed to start again.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
They're not doing their own Cub Care or whatever they call it, at Good Shepherd either.
Right.
So there's gonna be nothing available.
Right. That's tough.
On that depressing note, does anyone have anything,
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you to the town, to the library for making it possible for us to do the blood drive there with my father's honor, to Adrian for making that available, for Laura for being there also. Also to Rebecca Cry of Red Cross and her team for what they did. They had a great team there taking blood and making sure everyone was safe. To Lisa Bozer for coming over and donating blood. She's a trooper. Had to hold her hand, but you know, she did it.
No, you refused to hold my hand because of COVID. We had an agreement and you refused.
I did touch your hand. Let's just put it on the record, okay? You'll be okay, I told you. To Terry, Danielle, and her husband for coming out. To my wife for donating blood. She hadn't donated blood in a long time. And to those that couldn't donate blood because they had already donated blood in that time span. But they collected anywhere from 53 to 55 units of blood.
That's
So
great.
it's very successful, and I'm very glad that it went off so well. So thanks to the town. Thanks, Steve.
And thank
for
you to
your-
you for setting it up.
It was a very worthwhile. Means a lot. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
thank you.
So on the positive note, the library met last night and they are diligently working on when they're able to open up, that they can open up, and they're working on a plan. And their biggest concern is the health and safety of not only the residents, but their employees as well. So they want to make sure that they do it so that everybody is safe. And so they've got a couple different committees set up to work towards doing that, which is great.
Yeah. Amazingly enough, about 4 or 5 people came into the library thinking it was open during the drive.
Right,
Oh, yeah.
So people are ready to get into the
they're
library.
ready.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
They're ready.
I assume, Adrian, if you're on, the drive-through books are still going strong?
Yeah, we're up to 5 days a week with it, and it's busy. So it's been kind of it's a good thing, but it's made it challenging to figure out all the other stuff we're trying to do. But we'll get it done.
Have people been returning their long due books?
Yeah, we probably have 15 carts of returns that we've got a shelf right now, which is for us a lot. We're getting a ton of stuff. Actually, I did a couple of weeks ago at the senior center, I went on the grab and go day to just kind of hand out flyers about the curbside. And so many of the seniors had books in their cars to return. They're just like, hey, I have books in my back seat. I didn't know you were going to be here. Will you take them? So I guess they were just waiting to run into a librarian, which worked. So great.
Everybody needs to run into a library now.
Yeah.
Right.
Adrian, could you tell us, are all the other towns libraries doing the curbside, or is it just a limited number of towns? And how about the city?
It's all over the place. Everybody's doing something different right now. I would say the majority of the libraries have some kind of curbside setup. Some are doing, a much more abridged version. Some are doing a more robust version. Some still are not open at all. So it really is,
Okay.
Everybody's capacity is kind of different depending on what kind of support they have and planning they did, and the size too. Obviously the smaller libraries have a much bigger challenge in some ways. So
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
Anything else?
Last thing I'll say is that I did the bills today, and I just wanted to say thanks to the assessor's office for the job they're doing with all the new assessments, and it was really bustling in there today. It was busy, and Linda was buzzing around too, and so it was really interesting to see everybody working so hard. And I know a lot of towns didn't do it during the COVID, so I'm really glad our town did. So thanks to them.
And I will say that they show amazing patience and control on those calls. Some of them, the residents are rather angry. And, there's unfortunately, it's I still fight it. I'm going to keep waging the battle to explain to people how raising assessments does not bring in one additional dollar of taxes to the town, nor does lowering assessments decrease our tax. The tax is totally based on the levy. And, you know, if your property goes up, yes, you might be paying more taxes, but it's a portion of the taxes. The total pie is the same amount. And so, you know, again, last year, for example, a number of houses went up in value. And so other houses, their portion, you know, the tax rate went down because we held the tax levy flat. So there was 4.6% growth in the value of the town. There was a 4.6% drop in the tax rate because of that growth. We didn't collect $1 more. You know, I can't promise that we're not going to collect $1 more. That's certainly going to be our goal, but obviously COVID has a huge impact on that. The good news is we're in a really strong financial condition, but don't underestimate the ability to wipe that out if you know there's a huge resurgence and stuff has to get closed back down again. It's, you know, like I said, the thing we look at, the average increase was 12%. Not all houses were reassessed. It ended up at about 8.5% total change in the assessed value. When I look at Rush, who didn't have total assessment, their school tax rate was 17% higher than our school tax rate, even though it's the same school district. And the reason is because of what's called an equalization rate. Their county tax rate was 19% higher than ours. So overall, their taxes, because the school tax is a larger portion, their taxes, because of that equalization rate, are about 17% higher than they would be if they were at full equalization. Now, it's not exactly that because, again, obviously, if your assessments go up, you can pay more. But the point being, if we had done nothing and got hit with the same equalization rate that they did, taxes would have gone up. The rate would have gone up 17% after the equalization applied. That made no sense to us.
Right.
The politically expedient thing would have been to cancel it. It sure would have meant a lot less anger directed towards myself and the town. But ultimately, we would try to do what was right and best for the residents of the town, which was to do the reassessment so that we don't have the equalization rate. And for those who don't think that the real estate market is still going strong under COVID, that couldn't be farther from the truth. Property across the street from us went up for sale that night. It had 3 cash-based offers with 0 contingencies, all for about 160% of the assessed value. It sold before they even put up the for sale sign.
That's where you want to sell them.
So, you know, the market is still incredibly strong because there is so little available inventory. If you even just walk through Wegmans and hint that you sell, you're probably going to have a number of realtors knocking on your door saying, I'll sell your house for you. So it really is that strong a market. Don't know if that's going to change, but
Wish I was selling right now.
so.
You
You can't,
gotta find something.
Yeah.
Right.
you can't
You always
move,
gotta
Rob.
find something.
We need you here in Henrietta.
That's right.
I rent something.
Shout out. My office really appreciates it. So I will pass it along to my staff.
Great, sir.
Thank you.
Just want to thank Terry for all her help again tonight.
Yep. Anything else? Hearing nothing, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
Hearing no objections, meeting adjourned.
What time is it? 8:46. It didn't